In a world where humans believe they stand at the top of nature, some places remain untouched for a reason. This story follows a quiet wildlife researcher who enters a restricted land to search for answers, only to discover that something far more advanced has been watching from the shadows. What she encounters is not driven by rage or hunger, but by intelligence, patience, and choice. This is not a tale of attack or survival by strength alone. It is a story about observation, evaluation, and the thin line between being a hunter and becoming the subject. As the silence of the forest reveals its truth, one question remains: what happens when humanity is no longer the one deciding? Ilara had always been different, even as a child. People noticed it before she ever did. She moved quietly, listened carefully, and watched longer than most. When others spoke, she remembered not just the words, but the tone, the pauses, and what was left unsaid. Her hair had a natural red shade, and her eyes seemed sharp and alert, as if they missed nothing. Over the years, friends and co-workers gave her a strange nickname without meaning any harm. They called her the Vulpine girl, because she reminded them of a fox, curious, cautious, and always aware of her surroundings. She grew up near forests and open land, where nature felt alive and close. While other children played games, Ilara preferred sitting quietly, observing insects, birds, and animals. She believed that nature followed rules, even if humans had not yet learned them. That belief guided her life and career. As an adult, she became a wildlife researcher, known for taking on difficult environments that others avoided. She trusted knowledge, preparation, and calm thinking more than fear or rumors. When she heard about the exclusion zone, it immediately caught her attention. The place had many names, none of them comforting. Maps showed it clearly marked, with warnings issued by environmental agencies and local authorities. The official reason was simple and vague: extreme ecological danger. Unofficially, people whispered other explanations. They spoke of a presence at the top of the food chain, something that had adapted too well, something that did not behave like normal wildlife. Ilara read every report she could find. Most were incomplete. Some ended suddenly. Others contradicted each other. There were mentions of missing equipment, abandoned camps, and researchers who never returned to finish their work. Still, there was no clear proof, no solid data. To Ilara, that absence did not mean danger alone. It also meant unanswered questions. Local villagers near the border of the zone tried to stop her when she arrived. They were not hostile. In fact, they seemed genuinely worried. An older man told her that the land did not reject humans by force, but by design. Another said the forest listened. A woman warned her that the predator there did not rush, did not chase, and did not waste energy. It watched first. It learned. One warning stood out more than the rest. A man who claimed his brother had once entered the zone said something that stayed with Ilara. He said the creature did not always destroy right away. Sometimes it tested. It took a moment to understand what stood before it. Ilara thanked them all politely, wrote notes in her journal, and explained that she would be careful. She did not laugh at them or dismiss them outright. She simply believed that fear often grew when knowledge was missing. She entered the exclusion zone just before sunset. The air felt heavier there, as if the space itself carried weight. Trees stood taller and closer together, their branches blocking much of the fading light. Sounds faded as she walked deeper in. Birds stopped calling. Insects grew quiet. Ilara noticed this immediately. Silence in nature was never random. She set up a small camp using standard procedures she had followed many times before. Everything was measured, planned, and documented. Her equipment was modern and reliable, tested in harsh environments around the world. She marked her location, recorded environmental readings, and noted the unusual stillness around her. The ground showed signs of movement, but not the kind she could easily identify. Patterns seemed too precise, too intentional. As night settled in, Ilara sat near her camp, writing by soft light. She reminded herself to stay calm and focused. Fear could cloud judgment. Curiosity, when controlled, could sharpen it. Still, she could not ignore the feeling that something had changed the moment she crossed into the zone. It felt as if she had stepped into a place where the rules were slightly different. She reviewed the stories she had heard earlier that day. The idea that a predator could study instead of strike was unusual, but not impossible. Some animals already showed signs of learning and adaptation, but this felt more advanced, more deliberate. Alara wondered if humans had underestimated something that had been evolving quietly for a very long time. The forest around her remained silent. Even the wind seemed careful, moving gently through the trees without stirring much sound. Alara checked her instruments. Everything appeared normal, yet her instincts told her otherwise. She felt watched, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady, patient manner, like a presence that had all the time in the world. She stood slowly and scanned the darkness. Her light revealed nothing unusual. No glowing eyes. No sudden movement. Still, the feeling did not fade. She reminded herself that the human mind often reacted strongly to unfamiliar settings. She took deep breaths and returned to her notes. Time passed strangely that night. Minutes felt longer, and the darkness felt deeper than usual. Alara recorded small details others might ignore: changes in temperature, the direction of air movement, the way shadows formed and disappeared. She noticed that her equipment picked up fewer signals than expected. Not failures, but gaps, as if something interfered without fully blocking anything. She thought again about the warning she had heard. The idea of being tested rather than attacked unsettled her more than open danger. It suggested intelligence, decision-making, and purpose. If true, then the predator was not just surviving. It was choosing. Alara felt a sudden shift in the air, subtle but clear. Not a sound, not a movement, but a change in pressure, like the moment before a storm. Her heart beat faster, but she stayed still. She knew that sudden actions could draw attention. She listened instead, trusting the skills she had built over years of fieldwork. The silence grew even deeper. It felt intentional now, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Alara realized something important in that moment. Whatever lived here had already noticed her. She was no longer simply passing through or setting up camp. She was part of the environment now, observed and measured like everything else. A calm understanding settled over her. She had crossed a line, not just on a map, but in experience. This was not a place where humans automatically stood at the top. This was a place where something else decided when and how interactions happened. She closed her journal carefully and turned off her light, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. She did not know what the night would bring, but she understood one thing clearly. The stories were not just fear passed down through generations. They were warnings shaped by survival. As Alara sat quietly under the dark canopy, she accepted the truth she had been avoiding. She had come here to observe and learn, but now something unseen was doing the same to her. Morning came slowly, as if the forest itself was unsure whether it wanted the light to return. Alara opened her eyes after a restless night. She had not slept much. Every time she drifted off, the same feeling pulled her back in awareness that she was not alone. Still, nothing had happened. No sounds, no sudden movements, no clear signs of danger. That unsettled her more than noise ever could. She sat up and listened. The silence was still there, thick and heavy. In normal forests, mornings were busy. Birds called, leaves shifted, small creatures moved about. Here it felt paused, like the world was waiting for permission to continue. Alara took slow breaths and reminded herself to stay focused. Panic would only make mistakes more likely. She checked her equipment one piece at a time. The power levels were fine. Sensors showed readings, but the data felt incomplete. Some numbers were missing without explanation, as if something had brushed past the instruments without touching them. She noted everything carefully. Gaps in data were just as important as the data itself. As she stepped away from the camp to survey the area, she noticed the ground more clearly in daylight. There were marks in the soil that did not match any animal tracks she knew. They were not deep, but they were precise. Whatever made them had moved with intention, not haste. She followed the pattern for a short distance, then stopped. The marks vanished suddenly, as if the ground had never been touched. Alara felt that familiar sensation again, the sense of being observed. It was not like eyes watching from one direction. It felt wider, more aware, as if the forest itself was paying attention to her actions. She resisted the urge to turn in circles or call out. She knew better than to announce herself. She spoke softly into her recorder instead, describing what she saw and how she felt. Speaking grounded her. It reminded her that she was here to document, not to imagine things. Still, even as she talked, she felt a strange pressure, like her words were being measured. As the day moved on, Ilara explored carefully, never straying too far from her camp. She noticed that some paths seemed to open naturally while others felt closed even without visible barriers. When she followed the easier routes, her instruments worked better. When she tried to push into denser areas, her readings dropped again. It was as if the environment responded to her choices. She found biological traces on leaves and rocks, thin, almost invisible layers that reflected light differently. They were not harmful, but they were unusual. Under magnification, they showed patterns that suggested adaptation, not randomness. Ilara's excitement grew. This was evidence of something highly advanced, something that adjusted to its surroundings perfectly. Hours passed without incident, yet the tension never eased. She felt like a guest who had overstayed without realizing it. Every sound she made felt louder than it should have been. Even her breathing seemed to sharpen the quiet air. In the afternoon, her motion sensors began triggering alerts, but when she checked them, nothing was there. No movement, no heat signature she could identify. The alerts came from different angles, never repeating the same position. That detail troubled her. It suggested intelligence, not accident. Ilara reviewed the data and noticed something else. The timing of the alerts matched her own movements, often seconds after she changed position or direction. It was as if something was responding to her choices, not reacting blindly. She remembered the villagers' words about watching and learning. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully consider that possibility. If the predator here studied first, then every step she took was information. Every habit, every reaction, every pause mattered. As the sun dipped lower, the forest grew even quieter. Shadows stretched longer than they should have. Ilara returned to her camp earlier than planned. She adjusted her setup, changing routines on purpose, hoping unpredictability might help. She moved items, altered her walking pattern, and varied her actions. The response was immediate. The alerts stopped for a while, then resumed in a new pattern. Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Something had noticed the change. Night came again, faster than expected. Darkness settled like a blanket, thick and complete. Ilara kept her light low, using it only when necessary. She sat still for long periods, listening. Time seemed to slow, stretching each moment. Then she sensed it again, that shift in the air. Not a sound, not movement, but presence. Stronger than before? Her skin prickled, and her heartbeat quickened despite her efforts to stay calm. She forced herself to breathe slowly. She did not see anything, but she knew she was not alone anymore. This was not a distant awareness. This was close. Ilara stayed perfectly still. She remembered advice from years of fieldwork. When you don't understand what you face, observe before acting. She focused on small details. The way the air felt slightly cooler near her left side. The way shadows seemed deeper there, heavier. Her equipment flickered once, then steadied. No alarms, no failures. Just that faint interruption, like a held breath. Minutes passed. Or maybe seconds. Time lost its shape. Ilara felt studied, not threatened. The difference mattered. Threat came with urgency. This came with patience. She realized then that the predator was not moving because it didn't need to. It had already positioned itself perfectly. It was watching her reactions, testing her calm, her fear, her control. Ilara resisted the urge to reach for anything. She knew sudden actions could change the situation in ways she could not predict. Instead, she let her posture relax slightly, showing neither challenge nor surrender. Just presence. The forest remained silent, but the silence felt different now. It felt focused. At some point, the pressure eased. The sense of closeness faded, though the awareness did not disappear entirely. Ilara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied them. She recorded everything immediately, speaking quietly and clearly. She described the sensations, the timing, the changes in her equipment. She knew that memory could blur under stress. Documentation mattered. As the night wore on, there were no further signs. No alerts, no pressure. Just the deep, watchful quiet. Ilara stayed awake until dawn, afraid to sleep, but also determined not to show fear. When morning finally came, it brought no relief. The forest was still too quiet. Ilara looked around her camp and saw no signs of disturbance. Yet she knew something fundamental had changed. She was no longer just being observed in passing. She had been noticed, assessed, and remembered. As she packed a few items and reviewed her plans, one thought stayed with her, heavy and unavoidable. The predator had chosen not to act, not because it could not, but because it did not need to. Not yet. Ilara understood now that this place did not belong to humans. She was not the hunter, not the explorer, not even an intruder. She was the subject of attention, and whatever watched her was still deciding what she was worth. Ilara spent the early hours of the morning moving with care. She changed small habits again, not because she believed it would hide her, but because she wanted to understand how closely she was being followed. Each step felt like a question asked into the air. Each pause felt like waiting for an answer. The forest no longer felt empty. It felt aware. She noticed that whenever she slowed down, the pressure around her seemed to soften. When she rushed, it returned. This pattern repeated often enough that she could no longer ignore it. Whatever was watching her reacted to her pace, her breathing, and even her posture. It was not random. It was learning. Ilara stopped near a narrow clearing where light reached the ground. She chose the spot carefully. Open enough to see, but surrounded by trees that offered balance. She placed her equipment down and sat, keeping her hands visible and her movements calm. This was not surrender. It was communication, even if she did not know the language. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the air changed again. This time, it was closer. Much closer. Ilara felt it along her arms and neck, like standing near a deep current of water. She did not turn quickly. She let her eyes move slowly, scanning the edge of her vision. She saw it not fully, not clearly, but enough to know it was real. It did not step forward like an animal. It seemed to exist where it already was, blending with shadow and light at the same time. Its shape was difficult to define, as if the forest itself had folded inward. Ilara's mind tried to compare it to known forms, but nothing fit. It was not large in a simple way. It was present in a way that felt complete. Her heart raced, but she stayed still. The predator did not rush. It did not show urgency. It adjusted just slightly, as if aligning itself with her position. Ilara realized then that it had already been close many times before. She had just not been allowed to notice. She swallowed and took a slow breath. The space between them felt charged. Not threatening, but intense. Ilara felt pressure behind her eyes, a strange warmth in her chest. Her thoughts sharpened, becoming clearer instead of scattered. She had the sudden sense that she was being understood, not just seen. Then something unexpected happened. The predator moved closer. Not slow, but exactly enough to close the gap. Ilara felt a light contact against her hand, where her skin was exposed. It was not painful. It was not rough. It was brief, careful, and precise. Her breath caught in her throat. The contact lasted only a moment, but the effect was immediate. Ilara felt a wave of sensation move through her body. Not fear, not pain, awareness. Her senses heightened. Sound sharpened. Colors felt deeper. Her mind raced, then settled into focus. She realized what was happening. The predator was not harming her. It was analyzing her. The contact was a form of sampling, not consumption. It was learning her structure, her biology, her reactions. Ilara understood this instinctively without knowing how. The creature was gathering information the way humans use tools and tests. Her body reacted in ways she had never experienced. Her pulse shifted. Her breathing changed. She felt heat and coolness at once, like standing between sun and shade. It was overwhelming, but not unbearable. She gasped quietly, more in surprise than fear. The predator paused. That pause mattered. Ilara sensed it clearly. Her reaction had been noted. She focused on staying calm, letting her breathing even out again. She did not pull away. She did not reach forward. She simply existed in the moment. The contact ended. The pressure faded slightly, but the presence remained. Ilara felt suddenly exhausted, as if she had run a long distance without moving. She sat back slowly, careful not to break whatever balance had formed. Her thoughts raced as she tried to understand what had just happened. This was not a random encounter. This was not curiosity alone. The predator had a system, a method. It evaluated before deciding. And she had passed the first stage? She did not know what that meant. The predator shifted again, creating distance. Ilara finally allowed herself to look more directly, though her eyes struggled to focus. The creature's form seemed to change depending on where she looked from. It was not hiding. It simply existed beyond simple shape. She felt something else then. Not from herself, but from it. Assessment. Not judgment in a human sense, but evaluation. Ilara understood that she was being placed into a category. Threat, resource, irrelevant. Something else. She forced her fear down and focused on one thought. Remain unpredictable, but calm. She remembered the villagers' warnings. Panic invited endings. Stillness invited observation. Minutes passed in silence. The predator did not move closer again. Instead, it seemed to withdraw slightly, as if the test was complete. Ilara felt the pressure ease further, though it did not disappear entirely. She sensed that she was still being watched, but now from a distance. Her body slowly returned to normal. The strange clarity faded, leaving behind a deep sense of fatigue and awe. She realized she was trembling, though she had not noticed when it began. When she felt safe enough, she reached for her recorder with slow, careful movements. She spoke softly, describing everything she could remember. The contact, the sensations, the timing, her own reactions. She knew this information was important, even if no one believed her. As she spoke, she noticed something else. Her equipment had recorded data during the contact. Readings unlike anything she had seen before. Patterns that spiked and then stabilized. Evidence. That realization sent a quiet thrill through her. This was proof, not of danger alone, but of intelligence beyond expectation. The forest remained still. The predator did not return immediately. Ilara took that as a sign, not of safety, but of choice. She had been evaluated and set aside, at least for now. As the day continued, Ilara moved carefully, staying within a small area. She felt different, changed in ways she could not yet explain. Her senses felt sharper, her awareness deeper. Whether this was a temporary effect or something more, she did not know. She knew one thing with certainty. No human had ever experienced this and lived to document it. She had crossed a boundary that no map could show. She had not been attacked. She had not been ignored. She had been tasted in the most basic sense of understanding, not as food, but as information. As the light began to fade again, Ilara prepared for another night, knowing it would not be like the last. The predator had learned something about her. Now, the question was what she had learned about it, and whether that knowledge would be enough to keep her alive. The next moments felt longer than anything Ilara had experienced before. After the contact ended, she stayed exactly where she was, afraid that even a small movement might undo whatever balance had formed. Her heart beat hard in her chest, but she focused on keeping her breathing slow and steady. She reminded herself that fear was natural, but panic could change how she was seen. The forest felt different now. It was no longer just watching. It felt aware of her awareness. That thought unsettled her more than the encounter itself. She realized that this was not a simple meeting between a human and an unknown creature. It was an exchange, quiet and careful. Ilara slowly shifted her position, not to stand or run, but to sit more comfortably on the ground. She wanted to appear calm, grounded, and present. Her body still felt weak, as if much of her energy had been drained, but her mind was clear, clearer than it had ever been. She looked around, taking in every detail. The trees stood still. Shadows rested gently instead of stretching sharply. The air moved again, soft and normal, like it had decided to breathe once more. Whatever had been close was no longer right beside her, but Alara knew it had not left completely. She felt the urge to speak, not into her recorder, but out loud. It was not a logical decision. It was instinct. Still, she hesitated. Words were powerful. They could show fear or control. She chose silence instead. Minutes passed, then more. Alara lost count. Suddenly she felt that pressure again, but this time it was lighter, focused, and steady. It surrounded her without closing in. She understood then that the predator was still there, just farther away. Watching her response to what had already happened, her throat felt dry. Her chest rose and fell slowly. Then, without planning to, Alara inhaled sharply and let out a short gasp. It was not a scream. It was not a sound of panic. It was the natural release of tension after holding too much inside. The sound echoed softly in the clearing. The reaction was immediate. The pressure shifted. The air changed direction slightly. Alara sensed confusion, not danger. The predator did not retreat further, but it did not move closer either. It paused. Alara realized something important in that moment. The creature had expected certain reactions: fear, collapse, sudden movement. Silence filled with tension. Her gasp did not fit the pattern. She did not cover her mouth or apologize for the sound. She let it exist. Then she took another slow breath, steady and controlled. The predator adjusted again. Alara felt it clearly, like a change in focus. It was reassessing her, not starting over, but refining its understanding. She had shown something unexpected: recovery. That realization gave her a small sense of control, though she knew how fragile it was. She was not safe. She was simply interesting in a way that delayed final decisions. She stayed where she was, letting her body relax naturally instead of forcing calm. Her hands rested openly at her sides. Her posture was neutral. Not challenging, not submissive, just human. The forest remained silent, but it was no longer tense. It felt observant, thoughtful. Alara sensed that the predator was no longer evaluating her as a simple organism. It was considering her behavior over time. She thought back to what the villagers had said about predictability. Species that reacted the same way every time became easy to manage, easy to remove. Those that did not fit patterns required more attention. Alara understood now that her survival depended less on strength or tools and more on awareness and restraint. Slowly, the pressure faded even more. The presence thinned, like fog lifting from the ground. Alara did not move to follow it with her eyes. She did not try to confirm where it went. She knew better than to seek answers too quickly. She waited until her body stopped shaking before reaching for her recorder. Her voice was calm, though quiet. She described the pause, the gasp, the shift in presence. She spoke about how the reaction seemed to interrupt an expected outcome. As she recorded, she noticed something strange. Her fear did not return. The memory of the encounter felt distant already, like something processed instead of relived. That worried her slightly. Fear existed to protect, but she also understood that panic would not help her here. The rest of the day passed slowly. Alara moved only when necessary. She ate small amounts, drank carefully, and conserved energy. She avoided repeating movements, changed positions without patterns, and rested often. She noticed that the forest allowed this. No alerts, no pressure, no closeness. The predator remained present, but distant, as if it was satisfied. For now, with observation alone. As evening approached, Alara prepared her camp again, making small changes from the previous nights. She did not hide. She did not display tools openly. Everything was balanced, minimal, and calm. When darkness arrived, it did not feel threatening. It felt heavy, but patient. Alara sat quietly, watching the stars through breaks in the trees. She felt small but not helpless. Her thoughts drifted to the world beyond the exclusion zone, to people who would never believe what she had experienced, to reports that would be dismissed, to evidence that might be buried. But she also knew something else. The predator had not spared her out of kindness. It had spared her because it was still deciding. That thought stayed with her as the night deepened. At one point, she felt the presence again, farther than before, barely noticeable. It did not approach. It did not test. It simply existed. Alara understood that this was not a victory. It was a pause. She lay down carefully, keeping her body relaxed but alert. Sleep came slowly, light and shallow. She dreamed of patterns breaking and reforming, of eyes that did not blink, of silence that listened. When she woke near dawn, the forest felt unchanged, calm, observant, waiting. Alara sat up and looked around, her senses sharp. She knew the most important thing now was not to rush, not to assume safety, not to believe the danger had passed. She had been evaluated and found worthy of delay. That was all. As she prepared for the day, one truth settled firmly in her mind. The predator did not act out of hunger or anger. It acted out of decision. And she had changed the decision, if only for a moment, by being something it did not expect. That knowledge did not comfort her, but it gave her a chance. Morning arrived quietly, without color or warmth. Alara woke before the light fully reached the forest floor. She lay still for a long time, listening. The silence was still there, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt settled, as if a decision had been paused rather than completed. She sat up slowly and took stock of herself. Her body felt tired but stable. Her mind felt sharp, focused in a way she had never known before. The fear that once sat in her chest like a weight was gone. In its place was awareness. Deep, steady awareness. Alara stood and stretched carefully. Nothing reacted. No pressure. No shift in the air. The forest allowed her movement. That alone told her something important. She began packing her equipment with care. Not in a hurry, but not lingering either. She knew instinctively that staying too long after being noticed could change things. Curiosity could turn into reconsideration. She had been given time, not permission. As she worked, she checked her data one last time. The recordings from the encounter were still there. Clear, stable, impossible to explain with current science. Her instruments had captured patterns that repeated in ways nature usually did not. This was proof, not just of a creature, but of intelligence that operated quietly without spectacle. When she finished packing, Alara stood at the edge of her camp and looked into the forest. She did not call out. She did not try to say goodbye. She simply nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement. She did not know if it was understood, but it felt right. The walk back toward the boundary took longer than expected. The forest seemed to shift subtly, opening certain paths while closing others. Alara followed without resistance. She trusted the movement now, understanding that forcing direction could invite attention. Hours later, she reached the marked edge of the exclusion zone. The air felt lighter there. Sounds returned gradually. Birds called again. Insects moved. The world felt familiar, almost too familiar. She crossed the boundary and stopped. Nothing followed her out. That was the final confirmation. The predator had chosen not to pursue. Not because it could not, but because it did not need to. Alara made her way to the nearest research station and reported in using careful, measured language. She spoke of unusual readings, of environmental interference, of data gaps that suggested unknown adaptive systems. She did not describe the encounter directly, not yet. When officials arrived, they listened politely and took her equipment for review. Days passed, then weeks. The response came back neutral, cautious, dismissive, stress, isolation, environmental effects, equipment malfunction. Alara expected this. Privately, a few scientists contacted her. Quiet messages. Careful questions. They had seen the data. They did not know what it meant, but they knew it was real. Still, none were willing to challenge official conclusions openly. The story faded from public attention. Alara did not fight it. She withdrew from fieldwork soon after. She declined interviews. She refused speaking invitations. To most, she became another researcher who stepped away after a difficult assignment. But she did not stop working. From a distance, she continued to study the data. She compared it to other unexplained reports from around the world. Missing equipment. Silent zones. Areas where nature behaved too precisely, too calmly. Patterns emerged. She never published these findings. She archived them instead. Over time, Alara noticed something else. She herself had changed. Not in obvious ways, but subtle ones. Her senses remained sharper. She noticed shifts in rooms before others did. She sensed tension before words were spoken. She had learned something from the encounter, even if she could not name it. Years passed. Occasionally, she would receive messages from people who claimed to have felt watched in remote places. Not harmed. Just noticed. Alara never responded directly. She knew better than to confirm fears. But she kept records. Quietly. The exclusion zone remained closed. No new teams were sent in. No official reason was given. It simply became one more place on the map where humans agreed not to look too closely. Late one night, Alara stood outside her home, watching the stars. The air felt still, calm, familiar, for a brief moment. She felt that old awareness again, distant, gentle, not a presence, but a reminder. She understood then what the predator truly was. It was not a monster waiting to rise. It was a filter. It observed, it evaluated. It decided which species acted with restraint and which acted without thought, which patterns were predictable, which were worth continued observation. Humanity had not been spared out of mercy. It had been postponed. Alara looked up at the sky and exhaled slowly. The future was not decided yet. Choices still mattered. Awareness still mattered. She turned and went back inside, carrying the weight of knowledge she could never fully share. Some truths were not meant to cause panic. They were meant to change behavior. And somewhere deep in a quiet place, untouched by noise or haste, something continued to watch, still deciding.